It's time for On Point with Julian Phillips.
Well, welcome to On Point with Julian Phillips. I'm excited because this is my inaugural broadcast. And, once again, my whole thing is to empower people of color, people in the Black community, to let them know that they have a lot of tools in their own hands, things that they can do to empower themselves to make their lives better, making your life better, making you on point. One thing I wanted to start off with is voting. Now, I don't need a show of hands because I can't see your hands, but I'm sure the majority of you did not vote for Donald Trump. In fact, I think statistics show that anywhere from maybe 9% to as high as maybe 15% of African Americans voted for Donald Trump. Donald Trump thinks that he can get more people. But the bottom line is, for almost everybody in this country, even a lot of my friends, my conservative Republican friends who voted for Trump, a good percentage of them now have what is called buyer's remorse. But here's the deal. If you didn't like Trump and you didn't vote, or even if you voted for him, I want to share some stats that one of my friends gave me from Washington, D.C. Let this sink in here on the whole issue of voting. We're going to start with the swing states. Okay, those were the crucial states that Trump won. Wisconsin. Donald Trump in 2016 won by 23,000 votes. In Wisconsin, 93,000 blacks did not vote. In Florida, Trump won by 113,000 votes. 379,000 blacks did not vote. In Michigan, Trump won by 110,000 votes. 277,000 blacks did not vote. I got two more for you. In Pennsylvania, Trump won by 44,000 votes. 238,000 blacks did not vote. And last but not least, in the state of Georgia, where you can be, I guess, killed by just jogging black or running black, Trump won by 211,000 votes. 530,000 blacks did not vote. Now, you can imagine if blacks voted and came out, guess what? Trump would not be in office right now. And it affects everybody because we have this thing called COVID-19, where people are dying. Over 82,000 now in this country, over 1 million affected. And guess who's affected the most? People of color. Disproportionately with this COVID-19. But guess what? Perhaps if we voted, we wouldn't have Trump. Might we have COVID-19? Well, sure, Trump didn't create it. But guess what we had in place under Barack Obama? A National Security Council Directorate for Biodefense, Global Defense, that was abolished by Donald Trump. Keep that in mind. And Barack Obama, whether you like everything he did or not, I didn't like everything that he did. A lot of people were disappointed. People felt that he could have done more. We can talk about that. But he did have that National Security Directorate in, with people dealing with this. He talked about it in 2014. Right? He dealt with Ebola, H1N1. We didn't have this kind of catastrophe on our hands. Just think about it. Voting is key. And there are two parts of this, ladies and gentlemen. Voting is one part of it, but the vote is critical. You may notice when it comes to election time, whether it's a local election or a national election, everybody's friend's black. Black's everybody's friend's head. And after the vote is over, we disappear. Look at what happened with Joe Biden. And I wrote a column on this, that the Democrats owe blacks now because Joe Biden was floundering. Then comes Congressman Jim Clyburn from the wonderful state of South Carolina and does an impassioned, emotional appeal. And then there was a snowball effect all of a sudden. all over the country now, in the primaries, Joe Biden was winning. Joe Biden and the Democrats are blacks. Here is the issue. We'll vote Democratic, and you don't have to vote Democratic either, because I don't necessarily think Democrats do everything for black folks either. The point of it is, when you vote a politician in, the second step, and the most critical step after that, is to hold them accountable. A lot of times when politicians deal with communities, all sorts of deals are struck behind the scenes. I worked, on Capitol Hill for 2 years for a Congressman Ed Towns. So I know what goes on. But what happens is when we vote people in, then we don't keep them accountable. So therefore they get in, and a lot of times they do nothing. You think I'm wrong? Let's take a couple of communities here in New York City. Okay, I live in the suburbs of New York City, but I lived in New York. I grew up in Queens, New York. I'm a New York native. There are certain communities that exist in Brooklyn. One is Brownsville. One is East New York. They've been controlled by Democrats, black Democrats, mind you, for decades. You talk to a lot of people that live there. Do you see anything different? We'll say no. And then you have Bed-Stuy, right? Bed-Stuy has changed now a lot. You've got sidewalk cafes all along Fulton Street and this and that and everything else. The cost of the brownstones are going up. Well, it has nothing to do with the politicians. What it is, gentrification. You have people of non-color that are living there now. All of a sudden, the values change. And why? Because of who they are. Goods and services are now in there. Could we have done the same thing in our own communities? Yes. I grew up in St. Albans, Queens, middle-class black neighborhood, great neighborhood. We had the Little League and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and all that stuff as I was growing up. We had people in there who were very, very active in their districts with their politicians, and we got things done. They were active. You got to remain active. And even on the local level, politics is local. You got to get involved. Let's take this one step further. I was a reporter in New York City for over 20 years, for WNBC, Channel 11, so on and so forth, before I went to the networks. One thing that disturbed me, one of the first stories I reported on, this is back like in 1990, that the Satmars, it's a Hasidic sect in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, stormed the 90th precinct. Stormed it! Took it over. Not a shot was fired. Can you imagine something like that happening? Some blacks started to storm a precinct? Come on. Let's get real. There are double standards here. Why did this happen now? It happened because the Satmars were very much involved in politics there. They ruled the roost. It was the same thing in Crown Heights, and I covered 2 of those riots over there. All right. Of course, black folks were involved, and rightfully so, and upset. Gavin Cato was run over by, I guess it was a motorcade coming back, the Grand Rebbe of the Lubavitcher sect. That's over in Crown Heights. And there was a lot of, uproar about that, rightfully so. And there had been underlying tension between the black and Jewish communities for a long time. But I remember one thing that my pastor said at the time, A.R. Bernard, a great theologian. He said, instead of us getting so upset about how the Jews get preferential treatment, instead of being upset with them, we should start finding out how they do this and imitate them. They vote. When the Grand Rebbe says to go out and vote, 20,000 go out and vote. And the politicians know this. And what do? They respond. And they are at their feet day in and day out. They make sure that these politicians, when they put them in there, that they do what they say they're going to do. We can do the same thing. This is not rocket science. It works. All right? Think about all the things that people do, and this has nothing to do necessarily with color, to keep people from voting. There's this thing in Congress where it's called gerrymandering. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. Basically, what they do, and Democrats and Republicans are guilty of this, they'll change the voting district lines, so that will favor them. So say, for instance, if they change the lines 2 or 3 blocks over or whatever, they'll have more either Republicans, they'll have more whites or blacks, they'll have whatever there. They'll have all sorts of things going on there. My phone is going off, but that's okay. People are already calling in. They're excited about the show. That's what this is. Okay, so they'll do all sorts of things to change the voting lines to benefit them. Now we have this whole thing now of voter suppression. This has been going on for the last couple of elections. Why? Well, they're trying to keep blacks from voting. Voter ID. All right, so it's going to make it more difficult. If you don't have an ID, you can't vote. Then the next thing we have here is mail-ins. President Trump now is like, I don't like mail-ins because it's cheating. Well, where does that come from? He has no basis of fact for saying that, but he's saying it. Of course, some people are going to listen. And guess what has just happened, ladies and gentlemen? President Trump has now voted or nominated or whatever it is, one of his good friends to be the Postmaster General. A lot of this stuff might not have happened. Trump was not in office. Voting is important. Somebody says, oh, well, my vote doesn't count as one vote. Oh, yes, it does. Oh, yes, it does. Or you might say, well, I don't like either candidate. Well, do some research and find out the lesser of two evils and vote for one. Because votes attract. And if people know you're voting, they will pander to you more. They will cater to you more. You still have to keep them accountable, but they will do so. These things are very, very, very important. I don't want to hear about, well, I was dropped on my head when I was 5 years old. Or I'm a single parent, caring for 5 kids, and I've got 2 jobs, 10 jobs, 5 jobs, and no jobs, and I don't have time to vote. That's no excuse. That's what they, and I say they meaning people who are in power, want you to do. They want you not to vote. And recently now, this was last month, there was a voting in Wisconsin. I think it had something to do with the judges and justices up there and what they did during the course of the pandemic. The Republicans forced the voting procedure to go on. They cut down a number of voting places, I think down to about 5 or whatever. They still did not win, but they did this because they knew the power of the vote, what it could do or could not do. That's why right now there's a race by a number of Republicans, Mitch McConnell, to get as many justices as now. Because why? It changes the laws, and they want the laws in their favor. Things that will affect you and me for generations upon generations to come. Your vote matters, keeping people accountable. Those who you put in office matter. So this is an ongoing thing. It just doesn't end at the vote. I just want to talk quickly about the history of voting. You can go back to the 60s. Maybe some of you are too young to remember all those hoses and stuff that were sprayed upon people and people being pushed about. A lot of people lost their lives because of unequal rights in this country. We're talking about blacks down in Birmingham and Bull Connor with that whip and megaphone. Why'd they do all this? Do you think if voting was something that was not a factor for folks, that they would be doing all this to keep you from voting and keeping you from equal rights? No! They did it because they know it matters. Now, let me just say one other thing here, because we only have about a minute left. Black people are no different than anybody else. A lot of people don't vote. I think about maybe as high as 60%, or I think as high as 66 or 70% sometimes. A lot of people don't vote. But that doesn't mean anything with us, because things affect us more. And keeping people accountable is also good too, and key, because Black people are no different than people call anybody else. This thing through us, a human condition. The human condition, it affects everybody. Look at South Africa. Look at Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe fought for freedom. Then he becomes just as corrupt. Uganda, Idi Amin Dada, places in Nigeria, corruption that goes on there. We're no different. That's why even if somebody is Black, just because they're Black doesn't mean that they're going to automatically do the right thing. You got to keep them accountable. They're human just like everybody else. But the bottom line is, I hope after listening to me for 15 minutes, you see what power you have just in the vote. And for all you Christians out there who profess to be so high and mighty, I'm a Christian, I'm a lay minister. The scripture says we have the power. 2 Peter, okay? Actually, no. It's 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. And it says this: His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. He didn't say he has given us some things. He's given us everything. But we have to use the tools. Wake up. Be on point. I want to make sure that you're on point and stay on point. We'll see you next week.